Welcome back, GRD132, Typography 1 to our Web Typography responsive web design. And we're just doing some web typography, and we're going to use some media queries to adjust our page. All we did so far was just do this, which isn't too exciting. And we're going to do a little bit different method of adjusting our line lengths. Instead of just putting margin on either side of our text, we're going to adjust the width of all our body that we have here. And what we'll do is we'll target body in our CSS file. So I'll put an extra space here, and I'll just target body, and that's the body element, HTML element. And what I'll do first, I could give it a width. You can give it a background color. I'll give it a width. Now width will come up here, and I'm going to give it a width of %. Now you can give it pixels, except it's going to stay that way. So instead of just doing something like this, like we could do 640 pix or something like that, kind of measure it out and do something like that. Now that'll shorten it. Now we also want to put margin on either side that's even, and they do have a declaration that does that called auto, which means it'll put the even amount of margin. Whatever width this is, it'll put the even amount on either side, because I don't necessarily want to have all this white space here. I want it right in the middle. So what I can do here is do margin. Now it's not really going to do anything to the top, but we could still just put margin, and I'll just put auto. And when I do that, it'll kind of center it, because you can't typically just center a whole block, but that kind of centers it. It puts auto margin here and auto margin here, and the length, you have to have a width, and the width is 640 pixels. As your screen goes smaller, let's say you're on a phone or something, it's going to cut off. So it doesn't really change. So we're going to make it responsive. So what we're going to do is use relative elements so that it kind of changes as we go. So we don't have to just put one certain length in here. The length could kind of change. So to do that, instead of putting 640px, I'm going to figure, now I put 640px. That's not a bad line length. That's maybe 2/3 or so of the page. I think when I tried it before, I started with 66%, and then I tried 60. So we could go right away and just put 60%. So I'll put 60% here, and we don't have to hit run. I'll refresh it. It'll probably look similar. Actually, it's a little bit longer, but as we go here, it's always going to be 60%. And then eventually, it's almost too much margin when it gets really narrow. So we're going to change that. That'll be the last thing we do, but that looks pretty good. 60% of the page. So if it's a really wide page, we go across. You can make it smaller if you want. You can make it, 50 or 55, something like that. Whatever you want to do. That's a nice line length. Doesn't look a whole lot different, but that's a different way of kind of shortening your line lengths a little bit. So that's width. There's margin auto, which puts even space on either side, and it almost centers it. So I'm just going to put centers evenly, and you might be like, why are you typing this? I'm going to highlight this and do command / or command ? And if you're on Windows, use control instead of command. And I'm just putting a comment just so I know what that is. And this is % of window. This centers it evenly. And then I'll do something else here. I'll give it a background color. I'll go background. Now it doesn't do the dash, and I'll show you something with color. I'm going to do color, colon, and instead of putting antique white or something like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a £, and just do FF. Now that's white. 6 F's are white, and I'll put a semicolon. And it doesn't look any different. But now that you have this hex number here, and you can use RGB too, but I'm going to use hex. And then if you click on this thing, I wasn't able to do it last time, but I figured out you could click on this thing. You get this little color picker here. And now if you want it kind of an off-white color, I like to move the color scale, kind of the spectrum down here to kind of more of an orangey color, and then just pick out something lighter in here. Nice kind of light, warm, creamy kind of color. And then hit enter. And it's putting in a hex number, which is a lot of red and only a little bit of other. Well, actually, it has a lot of everything, but it has a little more red. And that's how it's getting the warm. It actually, if you click on here, it actually has RGB numbers. So they're all pretty even. There's a little more red, a little more green, which kind of makes it yellowish, and a lot of blue too, which kind of makes it very light. So anyway, we don't have to get into RGB colors right now, or hex colors. Just know that we have this kind of off-white color. And if you want a little warmer, a little peachier, go here and hit enter, it'll update that. So then if I go here and I refresh it, that looks nice. That's a little peachier than my other one. Actually, I might want to change that, but it's good for now. We could deal with it. We can always change that. So that's all I'm doing with body right now. I think except we would have to have a margin above this. Now I could put a margin in body, or I could do it on the H1. I'll just do it here, I guess. I'll do a second margin. Now this is just going to be margin top, so it'll only affect the top. And I'll do a colon, and maybe I'll just do something like 5%. 5%, and see what that looks like. I think that's what I used last time. And I think that looked okay. That's about 5% of the window. So that's, and again, you might say, well, that seems like a lot, but it's not measuring 5% from top and bottom. It's actually measuring 5% of the width across. So whatever that is, that's what it's using, 5% of the whole width across. It's using that as the top margin, just so you know. So that's the top margin. That's okay. If you want a little less, put it 4. That's the nice thing about CSS. You can kind of adapt this as you go. So there's our main headline. So we're going to need to adjust spacing. We're going to adjust the fonts. We're going to adjust the colors a little bit. We're going to do a lot of stuff. But before we do anything else, let's go get some Google Fonts. Now, I've just found a couple on our sample. We used Roboto Slab here, Roboto Slab, a lighter version, and Roboto Slab for the subheads, and then just a Roboto, regular Roboto sans serif for these. And let's try that out. I'm going to go to Google Fonts. Now, the ones I search for are going to come up again, so I'm going to wipe those out. So I'm going to go up here to Browse, and you can see I have the older ones. And if you have older stuff there, even from another assignment, you can just go here and just say Remove All. And I'll go to here and say Remove All. And then you could close this up, but that's this thing here, this View Your Selected Family. So I should see nothing right now. Now, what I'm going to search for first is serif. And I'll typically see Roboto Slab up here. So here's Roboto Slab. And I'll click on it where it says Variable to see the styles. And I think what I used was like a light. I don't want to go too light, like really thin like that, but I used a lighter body copy just for that paragraph at the top. Just for this thing, we're going to use like a real heavy Roboto Slab here, a lighter Roboto Slab, and then we'll use Roboto Slab again, maybe not as heavy, and then just a Roboto, a sans serif here. So I'm going to go and choose this, the 300, and I'm going to choose maybe the 700 for the sub headlines, and then maybe 900 for the big main headline. So I have 3 kind of weights there. You don't have to click all the weights. Just use the ones you think you're going to use. It'll help the page run faster. And then what I'll do, you don't have to do anything over here yet. Then what I'll do is I'll hit my back button and go back here and search. And this time I'll just search sans serif. So I'll search sans serif, and Roboto should be one of the first ones you see. And I'll go into the styles, and I think I'm going to use a lighter again. I'll use a lighter one. And if you're not sure, if you think, oh, that might be too light, then select the 400. You might want to use that. Who knows? And I might want to use a bold. So I'll use like a 700 bold. In case I use bold, or maybe there's something in the paragraph that's bold. I may not use a heading that's bold, but I may use that. I don't think I'm going to use 900 right now, but I think that's pretty good. So I think that should be enough, and you can always add more. So here we have Roboto, 300, 700, 900. We have a light, a bold, and a black. And then the Roboto is our sans serif. We have a light, a regular, and a bold. Now I don't have any italics or anything, but it should use an italic even if you don't specify an italic, unless you want to be very specific about the weight. But that should be all we need right now. And remember from last time, we used this @import, and we're going to copy everything but the style tags, because we're not putting it in our HTML page, we're putting it in our CSS page. So you don't need the style tags. Those are HTML tags. We're just using CSS, so we're just going to highlight this @import without the style tags, and then copy that. And we'll go back here, and it's in our CSS file. I'll put it at the very top and paste it. And then I'll go back here. Now, these are the only things for our font families. We only have 2 fonts, and we're going to use different weights. We could use the weights that are in here, 300, 700, 900, 300, 400, 700. So we can use those weights. I guess we have, what, maybe 6 weights we picked all together. So they're all listed in here, so you'll be able to see them. And these are basically the rules or the declarations for font family. I'm just going to copy both of these. I'll just copy them. Now, I'm not using them yet. I'm just going to paste them after here. Now, if you paste them here just normally, it's going to mess up your other stuff. I think if you go here, it'll mess up this style here. But you can close this up. I think it might mess up this next style. I'll preview it in a second. But once you do that, you're done with this, unless you're not sure yet. You can just leave this open. But you could close this up. And let me refresh this. And I guess it wiped out some of our spacing, and I think that's because of this stuff here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of put this in a comment, just temporarily, just so I can just have it here so I don't have to go back to my Google page. And I could do command question mark or forward slash, or if you're on Windows, do control question mark. Now highlight it and do that. And then they're in a comment. And then if I come here, it should go back the way it was. So it's not affecting those spacing wipeouts that we did. So somehow that affects what's going on here. So now we have these fonts available and we have these weights up here, and we could kind of start off and just focus on the headline here, and I'll just kind of work my way down. Even though I want to get spaces in here right away, I'll just kind of work my way down. So I'll start off with the H1. So I'll go here, I'll put an extra space, I'll type H1 and then a space and the curly braces. And what I'll do with H1 is I'll use font family Roboto slab. I'll just copy it here, including the semicolon, but not these asterisks. Leave those asterisks alone. Copy it, and then I'll just paste it here, and it's going to use Roboto slab. Now, because it's an H1, it'll use a bold, but I actually want to use the real heavy one. And if you're not sure, just go here and look at it and say, okay, that looks fine, that's bold. And then throw in font weight, and again, it's not giving us the shortcuts for font weight since the update, but I'll use font weight and I'll put 900 and I'll put a semicolon. Now you don't use units for font weight, there's no weight for it, it's just a number. And now if you refresh, look at it closely and see if it changes. And it does, it gets bolder. So now we know it was using the 700 as a default bold, but now I'm using 900. So that looks good. If I want to make it a little bigger, you remember I said it's about 200%. We could use something called M's. M's are kind of like percent. It's MEM is the default size for the type, and then you could kind of go from there. So instead of using like 120%, you could use 1.2. It's just going from an M. It's going from its default is a way to kind of look at it. So for example, if you wanted to put font size, colon, and then put 2.5M, or even 3M, because I think it's 200. So if we do 3M, 2M shouldn't look any different. So let's see what this looks like. And it doesn't look any different. So it is 2M. So it is double the size of our default. So if we make it triple the size of our default, it should be a little bit bigger. So I'll make it 3M. And there, it's nice and big. Nice big headline there. And that's fine. And then we'll do the paragraph underneath it. We'll do P dot, because that's a class name, and that's intro. We gave it a name of intro. And I'll do my opening, closing curly brace. And if you're not sure, go here and make sure it says P class equals intro in quotes. So that'll be just this paragraph we're targeting, this paragraph. And I'll go back to my styles. And I'll use all of this stuff. I'll copy this. Now, that just saves me some typing. I still am going to use Roboto slab, and I'll still use Serif as a default. But instead of 900, I'll use 300. And instead of 3M, I might use something like 1.5M and see how that looks. Because I don't want it a giant, I don't want it really big. So I'm lightening the weight from 900 to 300, changing the font size. It's kind of like 1.5 times the size. So let's see how this looks. And that looks nice. That's a nice kind of headline and kind of description. Now we need space between these things. Those are the H2s and the other paragraphs. But that's pretty good so far. So I like the way that looks. Now let's target our H2s. And we'll just put space before. And we could even do this. We have font family Roboto. We can use Roboto again and maybe copy these two and put them here. It's going to use Roboto, and we don't need weight. I think it'll just use the lighter one by default, so I'm going to take out the weight. But I am going to put a space before, and the way you do that, if you remember from my other exercise, you can use padding top. It'll put space in between there, and we could use M's again. We could use padding top. There's padding, and I have to use dash top and a colon, and then I'll just do 1M, which should be about 16 pixels. So if you want a little more, 1.2M, you could do that. That's about 20 pixels above. And remember, you can have a space here or not have a space here, but you cannot have a space here. You can see the color changes. You don't want to put a space between the unit marker and the value. but you can put a space after the colon if you want. But since I have been using spaces, I'll try to stay consistent. So let's see how this looks. And it does it to both headlines because I targeted H2. That looks good. And then I'll just target my body copy. So if you remember, now I didn't put a space here. That's okay. I'll put p.bdy. And if you just called it body, leave it body. I mean, there's not a problem. I just didn't want to confuse anything with body the element and body the class name. That's why I just put bdy. So I'm going to target body, and I'm going to use Roboto. So I'll go here and I'll highlight from here to the semicolon. I don't want the asterisks or the slashes or anything, and I'll copy them and I'll put it here. And now that I copied them, let's just get rid of these so they don't create any problems. I'll just delete them. I don't need these. Make sure you don't do anything with this part. And Roboto, sans serif. Now what weight is it using? I want to use kind of a lighter weight. I'll try 300. So I'll go down here, and if I could just copy this. It's already done right here. Copy font weight 300. Put it after here. And see how that looks. And that looks pretty nice. You could go a little bit bigger. I think our body copy could be a little bit bigger. I had I didn't adjust the body copy at all. So let me go to font size. I'll see how that works. Font size 1.5. That may be a little much. I'll put maybe 1.3. So that's about 130% of the regular point size. That's a little bit better, maybe even a little too big. I don't want it to compete with that. I want it to be smaller. We can maybe go bigger with this, a little smaller with that. So I'd say 1.2 would look good here. And maybe for the intro, maybe 1.6. We'll go just a tiny bit bigger. That's a little bigger. This is a little smaller. And even the sans serif looks a little crowded. We can kind of adjust the line length a little bit. So that would be the line height. Line dash height. All one element with a dash. And then I'll just try 1.4, which is like 140%. I think we used that before. I'll put a space in here to be consistent. 1.4. Oh, M. We got to put M here. Don't forget the M. The only time we don't put a unit is when you're just using weight, or if you're using 0 for something. But for a unit like that, you have to put a unit in there. And if you don't have a unit, it'll just ignore it. It just won't do anything if you didn't have M in there. So if I didn't have M in there, well, looks like it did something. Let me put M in there and see what it does now. Oh, it actually worked without the EM. But trust me, put the EM in there. And I think that's pretty good. It makes it a little bit lighter here. I don't know if I need to go much more than that. I think that looks pretty good. And I think that's good for now for part 2. I think we'll finish up with part 3. What we'll do is we'll just adjust some colors, and we'll do our responsive design with part 3. So I'll close this up, and we are going to use a website, W3 Schools, just to copy our media queries and put them in here. So we'll do that in part 3, but so far it looks pretty good. And remember, when you resize this, our line lengths adjust. Now, it might be too much when you get to this point. That's why we're gonna adjust our width of body when the screen size or the window size gets smaller. But that's a good start for us. So that's part 2, and we'll finish up in part 3 with just coloring some of this stuff and using our media queries, which is really responsive web design. Now, even using M's and percents is responsive because it's relative values. We're not using pixels anywhere. If you notice, we didn't use pixels anywhere here. So we're trying to be a little more flexible since we're working on the web. It's just a different environment for digital devices. So that's what we want to try to do. So we'll see you back with part 3, and we'll finish this up for our ex12 web type RWD.